was the summer.
This is our reference photo for this painting. This is a house in Chico, California, right in College Town, so I would walk past it every single day on my way to school. And I think you should paint things you know. Like, I saw this house so many times that we have a connection. You know, this house makes me feel something. So that will give me a deeper understanding of the subject matter, and hopefully that should show in the end product. And I'm using the style of this painting I did in a previous video. So, you know, this is another Edward Hopper style watercolor painting. I'm obsessed. After painting this house, I'm kind of done painting houses. It's like all I've done for the last 2 years. I think I'm going to move on to painting birds. Edward Hopper is a super famous American artist who's mostly known for oil paintings, but he's also one of the best watercolor painters of all time. How I understand his style is that he's really focused on value of light and shadow. He's not just worried about painting a house, he also wants to paint it in a certain light and a specific point in time. So that is what we are trying to accomplish. We want to convey the feeling of a specific place and time. And lights and shadows are so dynamic, they are almost like the best tool to do that with. And Edward Hopper is just the master of doing that in watercolor, so that's why we are copying him. I did do a quick study of this house, but the shadows are not dark enough, and it's a bit too simplified, and a lot of the colors are just totally off, so it was a good learning experience to get familiar with the subject, but other than that, it's just kind of lame.
The danger boy never dies.
Danger boy life is a lonely one. The danger boy life is a holy one.
Okay, let's start painting. So I'm going to start by painting the lightest parts of the tree on the left there, and that's just because it's easier to paint the sky around that, since the sky is going to be a little darker. This tree's on the edge of the painting, so I'm going to leave it super simple and blocky. Too much detail would lead the viewer's eye away from the house. For the sky, I am painting this with no tricks. I want to paint this with the most practical style of painting ever, where I just put paint on the paper, right? I'm not doing a gradient wash or anything like that. I'm just mixing ultramarine and cerulean, and I'm just trying to get the value of the sky correct. That's all I care about. This is a study on value, and anything more than that is just unnecessary. No fancy watercolor tricks for this painting. Now I'm going to paint the front face of this building, and I'm not going to paint every single individual brick because that's not really what you see when looking at this wall. I just squint my eyes and try to see, I guess, the effect of the wall. Just, you know, try to see what your eyes are actually seeing and not what your brain thinks it is. And what I kind of see is it's all similar colors. It's all super light, but there's some areas that are a bit more brown, red, some that are a lot lighter. So I'm just going to try to replicate that effect. I did paint that first part of the wall by wetting the paper and then kind of dropping colors into it, but I thought that looked a little bit too watery and smooth. Doesn't really look like the brick wall. So for the rest of the building, I'm just going to paint directly onto the dry paper and kind of let the different colors I'm painting mix together there. When I've got all the paint on the paper, I notice some of it is too blotchy and I'm missing some lighter areas. So I lift it with a paper towel and then I'll wet some other areas to lift some more paint. The two right corners of this building are super light, so that's where I'm lifting the most. I then take a dry brush and kind of skim over the texture of the paper to give more of an impression of bricks. Adds a little bit more interest. When mixing paint on the paper like this, you just have to make sure the paint you're adding is drier than the paint already on the paper, or the water will go from your brush and bloom back out onto the paint that's already on the paper. It's like osmosis. Making these videos is kind of hard for me because I don't really know what to say. You know, I'm painting pretty simply. I'm just putting paint on the paper, trying to get the value right. So usually I try to fill the time by telling some sort of story, but lately my life has just been super boring. Like, I don't do anything. I just go to work and come home and try to paint a little bit. Although the other day I was on a run and I ran past these 3 deer. It was a mom and 2 fawns, and the mom jumped over a fence and got separated, and the two fonts just started running around me. They kept doing circles around me just over and over again, just a few feet away. It was crazy. And also, these wasps built a nest where the kind of external electrical wire goes into my house, and they just swarmed my backyard for weeks, and there's just hundreds of them. I did get a guy to come out and get rid of them though, so that is nice. Here's an important part of the painting. This is kind of what the whole painting's about. It's about these light areas hitting these darker, more shaded areas. So it is of utmost importance that I get this value correct. And that is some sort of mixture of like crimson, burnt sienna, and ultramarine. The chimney on the left side has sort of the same color, but I'm going to make it a little bit more faded so it goes into the background. And I'm continuing to just paint the lightest parts of the painting. This sidewalk is a gray, and I make my grays with ultramarine and burnt sienna, and the areas that are a little lighter have more burnt sienna to kind of warm them up. To make objects fall into the background and to create a sense of depth in your painting, you want to make things further back cooler by adding some blue. And that's what I'm doing to this roof back there. It's a little cooler of a gray. I'm not really sure why cooler things kind of fall into the background. Maybe it's recreating the effect of atmospheric haze that affects objects that are kind of further away. Or maybe your brain is just interprets warmer things to be closer to you. And maybe that's due to atmospheric haze. I don't know. I guess cooler things kind of do blend in further with the background, and that also creates depth, but I'll have to look into that. Okay, I just looked it up. It says cool colors recede into the background because of atmospheric perspective, eye physiology, and learned psychological associations. So I think that's kind of what I was getting at. If you look at the photo, this kind of concrete trim at the bottom of the building really blends in with the rest of the wall. So I think I painted it a bit too different, so I'm making it way lighter and trying to just make it match up perfectly. There's also a clean white line on the top of that base that the sun is directly hitting that I also want to keep. In the photo, the tops of these bushes are like super neon yellow, and that's from the warm, bright summer sun, and that's exactly what we need to capture. So I'm going kind of crazy with that saturated bright yellow. My weakness has always been painting plants, I feel. Just green is a really hard color for me. In each plant, there's so many different greens. You just really have to know your palette. And you can't be afraid to put red in there to warm it up, or try to gray it down a bit. You just gotta really study the plant and know your palette well. My palette only has 12 colors, but I still feel like I barely know how to make green. For most of the plants here, I chose to use a kind of a base green of cadmium and cerulean, and that makes kind of a lighter, more teal green. And then I'll work off that base. I feel like adding cadmium red kind of grays it and mutes it a bit, and then ultramarine darkens it and cools it. So I just try to strike a balance and just apply the specific color where it needs to be. But I'm mostly just focusing on the value, just the darkness and lightness of the pigment. I have a lamp shining directly down onto the painting, but I also have my ceiling fan's light projecting from behind me, and that's kind of creating a shadow on the painting, so I'll probably try to avoid that next time. I'm painting some flowers here, and I like the muted lavender color I used there. I rarely use purple. Here's kind of like a weird, hard part of this painting. The underside of these overhangs that's in shadow, and they're kind of like a dark, muddy yellow color, so it's kind of hard to get that right. I think yellow ochre lends itself well to making kind of a darker yellow, but we don't want it to look like totally mud trash. And these areas are also super dark. If you look in the photo and squint, they're almost as dark as the darkest part on the right side of that building, even though in real life they're just white and shade. Crazy stuff. I am now painting one of the most important parts of this painting, this dark side on the right side of the house. It's important because this is one of the darkest areas and it's quite daunting, so I just want to get it out of the way. That's why I'm painting it now. Sometimes when I'm painting, I have to be brave. Lots of people want me to paint and finish the painting. But this is kind of where the whole idea of emphasizing lights and shadows comes into play. So I just really want to get the darkness correct. And I even make it quite purple just to give it a little bit more flair, more drama. I think I could have gone darker though. It's never dark enough. Watercolor, man, it messes with your brain because it dries like twice as light as when you paint it. I'm trying to think of something to say. I went out of town last Saturday and a rock cracked my windshield flung from another car. And that's the second time that has happened in a single year. I just think that is extremely unlucky. And then I took my car's key fob and I put it in my swim trunks that were like barely damp and it broke the key fob. I was like, all right, no big deal. I'll just order another one off Amazon. No, those are $300 plus from your car's dealership. Like, what the? And then I replaced my car's speaker because it blew out. And the speakers I put in rattle my car's door, like the plastic that connects to the door so much that I had to put socks inside my door to stop it from rattling my car. I just want to live. Here I'm painting in these windows, and you might think that's a super dark blue, but really I'm just painting the kind of white edge of those windows. The panes of glass inside of that are going to be even darker. So in these super dark areas, you just got to really pay attention to context and how dark those values are, even though they look white in the photo. Now I'm doing kind of the wash for this lawn, and this is the closest thing to the viewer in the painting, so you got to make those colors saturated. That's all I got to say. Oh, and you see how the grass kind of gets bluer and cooler as it goes to the background? See? Oh, there's my color chart. That's another tip I could give you. You got to make your own color chart. It makes every one of your colors. It's a good learning experience. This brush I'm using here was like $40, and it was supposed to be a nice expensive brush, but it sucks. I feel like it does not hold pigment at all. It only holds water. And I wanted it to be my main brush. But yeah, don't buy from Michaels. Even their like nice stuff is awful. The bush I'm painting here was almost like the hardest part of this painting. I'm using kind of an evergreen green. And with something like this, you got to make sure even the lighter greens are still pretty saturated. So you don't want to make them too light. I don't really like how I painted that bush in the end. I think I let the fact that it's a plant invade my brain and cloud my judgment. So I was painting way too much detail, almost painting leaves. But if you just look at the photo and squint your eyes, it's really just a massive green with slight variations in value. So I got lost. Now I am painting what I think the most important part of this painting is, which is the shadow cast by the balcony back onto the house. And, this is the most dramatic, crazy shadow in the whole painting. So I gotta make it count. I feel like I make it more of like a deep color with more red compared to the cooler blue shadow on the right side of the house. So it really pops. Usually with watercolor, and what I've said in the past, is you want to paint your paintings light to dark because, you could paint dark on top of light, but not light on top of dark. But I'm kind of breaking that rule here by painting that super dark shadow. And I think in oil painting, they actually teach you to paint your darkests first, and then you base the rest of the values of the painting off those darks. So I'm kind of using that here, where I paint the lightest parts of my painting, and then I paint the darkest parts right now that I can. And then I base my midtones on the rest of the painting off of those two values. and those kind of help me get the midtones as correct as possible. And I am continuing painting in some darks. If you look in the photo, that shadow under that bush, super dark. That bush is quite interesting. The top half is super light, bottom half is super dark. I guess everything in this painting is really top lit, extremely harsh light. And I think I'm going to go even darker over that green. With areas like this that are almost pitch black, super dark, I wouldn't be afraid to layer on top of that, make it even darker if you have to. Because the kind of natural transparency of watercolor doesn't really need to apply in a situation like this where you just want to get it as dark as possible. I feel like I could make the paint pretty opaque in that situation. Some shadows you really do need to get it right in one layer though. Like that shadow under the balcony, I really wouldn't want to go over that again. In the photo, you could tell it's still getting some light and it almost kind of glows. It's really warm. If I went over that again, it would be too opaque and I would lose the kind of translucent glowing effect that watercolor gives you. So adding another layer would make it flat and wouldn't let the glow of the paper go through. Now I'm painting the shadowed part of the building underneath the eave, and this is kind of a tricky, weird part of the painting because all the colors are kind of muddy and they're all pretty similar, but kind of how I thought about this and how I got through it is I just focused on the value first and then I focused on the temperature. Like that bottom band is a lot cooler and darker than that kind of top strip that I just painted. That top strip I painted kind of right underneath the gutter is a lot lighter. I think it's getting some reflection from the ground, so it's warmer and lighter. And I'm kind of just starting off with a base gray and adding some yellow to warm it up and some ultramarine to cool it down. So you just gotta kind of systemize how you're painting areas like this. The three colors I'm using for this shadowed area underneath the eave is ultramarine, raw sienna, and yellow ochre. And I'm just balancing the mixing between those three. And I'll use the same colors when I paint the balcony too. There's this movie called Perfect Days, and in that movie, the main character, every day he kind of walks to a park on his lunch break, and he'll find like a little maple sapling and put it in a little paper pot and then take it home and raise it as a bonsai. And I realized I could just do that too. You could walk around and just find little saplings and make them into bonsais. So now I have a few bonsais going. And I was like, I really want an oak tree bonsai. So I go and find the tiniest little oak sapling. But if you didn't know, for some reason, oak saplings, they put all their energy into growing their root system. So a sapling could be an inch tall and have a foot-long, deep root system. It's impossible to get out of the ground. But I finally dug one up like with a whole shovel. I had to bring a shovel with me while walking around. And then I planted it and it immediately died. I think the heat going on right now, it's like 100 degrees, is just too much to repot something like that right now. I was also thinking, how earlier I said I wanted to stop painting houses and start painting birds a little bit? But I walk around and I take photos of all the houses that I paint. Like I'll just walk around for hours taking a million photos. But it's a lot harder to take photos of birds. And even if I could get a nice photo, the lighting will probably be awful. So I think I'll have to get a book with bird photography in it. But I don't want to pay for anything like that. So I think I'm going to go and get a library card and go to the library. I don't want to have to look it up, but I'm not even sure how getting a library card works. Do I just go in and ask the librarian, can I get a card? I don't know. I remember when I was a kid, that's what you did. You just went in and got your card, and you just signed the back of it. But I bet nowadays you have to sign up for an account online and go through a bunch of steps. So maybe it'll be easier to just order a book. I actually just thought of something. Maybe it was so easy for me as a kid when I was like 9 getting a library card because my mom did all the sign up and then I just had to write my name on the back of the card. That's probably what happened. Painting areas like this could get super tedious, but you just cannot let yourself get bored. Because if you get bored, you'll go onto autopilot and then you'll mess up. So you really just have to find as much enjoyment as possible out of painting something like this. I think how I do it is when I'm painting something that's kind of tedious and muddy, the colors aren't that exciting, the values aren't that exciting, I still try to focus on it as if it's the most important part of the painting. Because that's kind of, you don't want to half-ass a part of your painting. You want to bring out as much artistic value as possible. So just think of that and just be serious about your painting. And I don't think you'll really get bored doing these more tedious parts. I was debating whether or not to paint that telephone pole in front of the house. And, me, I like painting things exactly how they are. Not trying to be super realistic, but I just want to paint things truly how they exist in real life. Everything included. But that telephone pole, it really covers up parts of the painting I would rather paint. And it would not look that great, I don't think, if I painted it. So I sacrifice painting things true to life just for a little bit of aesthetic reasons. But I try not to do that all the time. Feels like I'm being a little fake by not painting that. But I'll forget it was even there. Now I am painting the balcony, and it's many of the same colors that I just painted, but it's a little bit more intricate. I actually like how I painted the balcony. I think I didn't get lost in the detail, because it's complicated. You could really overcomplicate it and overpaint it, but I feel like I gave the impression of detail pretty well by kind of just putting in little dips of paint where they needed to be. While I wait for what I painted on the balcony to dry, I'm just going around adding some texture, darkening some areas on the rest of the painting. Painting when it's 100 degrees is cool when you want things to dry quickly so you could paint fast, but it really sucks when you're doing washes. When I painted the blue for the sky, I think I did it at 6 a.m. so it was cold enough so it wouldn't immediately dry up on me. This is actually my second attempt at doing this exact painting. I got everything drawed out and I stretched my paper and I tried doing the sky while it was too hot and it just immediately ruined the painting. I had to restart. Here's an example of where I think I painted the impression of detail well. So between these pillars on the balcony, there's a little gap, and on the left side it gets pretty dark. So I kind of just look at that gap and it has kind of a weird shield shape. So I just get some dark paint and kind of dab in a shape that's remotely similar to that. I'm not being too exact. Here where there's some shadow, I just put little dots, we're painting with some style. Oh, the gaps between these pillars are dark? I just paint a little bar. No need to complicate things. Super easy. And this is where painting's pretty fun. Usually I would leave more detailed areas like this to paint at the end, because I paint kind of more abstractly to more detailed as the painting goes on, but I really don't want to paint those plants. They're just very intimidating, and I want to give myself as much time as possible to think about how I'm going to paint them. When I'm painting this front part of the balcony in shade, I'm squinting at it and I notice that the shadow is just about as dark as that shadow cast onto the wall. So I want to get that value correct. And this area here is the darkest of all, and it's probably the same value as the shadow under the balcony. So yeah, make it even darker. We gotta add some drama. And we'll just add some finishing touches, like the shadow on the pillar. Pretty cool. The very underside of this balcony is kind of a warmer gray. I think from the reflection from the ground, or maybe even the glow from the wall of the building. This is what I live for. Value and temperature. It's all I have. This large bush that I'm painting now is kind of interesting because it's very sparse. So I want to avoid painting individual leaves, and it seems from looking at the photo that there's a lot of branches going on, and when you squint your eyes it just really comes off as, I don't know, areas of gray. So that's what I'm painting. Gives the effect that there's branches there, right? Gray branches. Groundbreaking. And now I'm just kind of letting my brush go crazy. You know, I'm just looking at the photo, going off what my eye sees, and I don't want to paint the same color too many spots on that plant because really no two greens on that plant are the same. So really frequently, every time I go to a new area, I want to change the green up a little bit, maybe make it cooler or warmer or a lighter value, darker value. Maybe I use less water so it has more of a dry brush effect, you know, just giving it some variety. Now I am painting some of the main branches of this plant, and they're not too noticeable, so I kind of use a similar color to the rest of the plant, maybe make it a bit more gray. When I paint the shadow on the building, that's really going to blend in kind of how it is in the photo. I do think the bush at this point is a little too all over the place. There's some weird detail, and there's not enough large blocks of color that kind of give it unity and make it all come together as one object. So I'm going back, removing some paint where it needs to be, and then adding some larger blocks of value. And then I just go right into painting that super dark shadow on the building. With this shadow here, I'm using almost no water. I'm almost not even watercolor painting. I do end up disliking how I painted this dark shadow, and I redo part of it. I think it lacks like a sense of naturalness. I added too many frequent gaps in that shadow, and it needs to be more whole. I think this is just another instance where I let my brain kind of override what my eyes are seeing from the photo, and my brain's telling me, you know, towards the middle of the shadow it's going to be more, there's going to be less gaps for light to go through because that's the middle of the plant. But as you go further out, there's going to be more and more gaps, but really in the photo there's only some gaps once you get to the very edge. And I think why my brain kind of took over is because this is a difficult part of the painting, and in my head I just built it up to where I'm like, all right, this is an important part, I gotta do this right, and then my brain took over instead of just painting like how I should. So I kind of surgically fix this shadow, and I do even draw it in so I get this part right. This is a good reminder to not let a part of your painting stress you out, because your brain will take over and it will just overthink everything. I think some of my paints have actually degraded and gone bad. I think they've been sitting in their wells for too long, and I've like wetted them and re-wetted them so many times that it's almost like the binder has separated from the paint. So when I mix with it, the mixture gets super gooey and the pigment gets pretty faded, and that's kind of what is happening here, but I make it work. So I do need to replace, I think it's my crimson and raw sienna is gone bad. When the repaint of that shadow is done, it's a little darker than the rest of the shadow, but I don't care. That doesn't matter. The shape itself looks better. You could tell how important I think a part of the painting by how close my head gets to the paper. Maybe it just depends on the difficulty of what I'm painting, like this window frame. Just is a little bit more detailed. So I gotta focus. Alright, the rest of this is basically just gonna be me painting plants. So get ready! Okay, I am now recording about 6 days later than when I recorded that last sentence. I had to go out and live so I could get more material, more bits for my narration, so I could keep this plant painting part a little interesting. I mentioned earlier that I've broken my windshield on my car twice this year, but not only have I done that, now my dog smashed the window on my front door. I opened the door and my dog ran, knocked over a hat stand, which just crashed straight into the glass pane on my door. So I have to fix that now, and that's going to be $400. The last 6 days have not been entirely negative though. I did go to a bar and there's a flyer saying they're going to have a goth dark wave dance party later that night. So I went with my friend, and we thought there'd be like 8 goth people showing up to this bar because I live in kind of a small town. But we showed up and there was 100 goth people in this tiny little dive bar. It got pretty crazy and we danced with a lot of goths. With this evergreen bush I'm painting now, I think I painted it with too much detail, and in the photo it is a bit more of a brighter green. So I definitely could have warmed it up. And then I also do go over some of that bush later to kind of blend in some of those values to make it, I don't know, more natural looking. When I was painting this shadow under the bush, I was really just winging the shape. I didn't draw it or anything, and I definitely messed it up. So I'm going to redo that. I just really want this shadow to be super sharp and crisp. I really want it to stand out on this bright patch of grass, really give attention to itself. These are the areas of the painting where I really want the viewer's attention. So over the weekend, I went on a trip with some of my friends, and I barely got any sleep, and the sleep I did get was just awful, because we were out doing stuff. So when I got back to my house and tried going to bed on Sunday, I had the weirdest experience I've ever had trying to sleep. I guess I was kind of sleepwalking, but I knew I was kind of stuck in a state between being awake and being asleep, and I was just completely hallucinating while walking around. And I got up to try to completely wake myself up, and I put on a YouTube video, but I just could not wake myself up entirely. I just kept hallucinating. It was like I was dreaming while being awake. But every time I would try to fully go to sleep, my mind would just wake me back up into that in-between state. It was just horrible. And I've been watching Twin Peaks, and I just kept hallucinating that I was in the red room with all the curtains. It was freaky. Do not sleep deprive yourself. That was just from 2 days of not really sleeping. I eventually was able to go to sleep, but when I woke up the next day, I felt like the most sleep deprived I've ever felt in my entire life. It was horrible. And immediately after that, I had to go to work and mount a 300-pound, 98-inch screen TV on a wall 10 feet high, and it was almost impossible. I did have a fun trip though. Me and my friend found a 200-year-old Catholic shrine. It was like a little church, just one room in the middle of nowhere, just between these endless miles of fields of vegetables. It was really cool. We just hung out there, and there's a ton of stray kittens, so we just petted them for a little bit. Now I am just going along and painting this larger plant, doing what I've been doing, just switching up my values, switching up the colors, focusing on the temperature, some bluer, cooler areas, some lighter, warm areas, and making sure to change my green pretty often. I'm also trying to keep my brushstrokes natural by being pretty loose with it. There is another evergreen bush in front of the larger bush, so I want to differentiate that. And here I'm kind of doing what I said, where I'm blending the colors of that other evergreen bush by just kind of glazing over it. Kind of unite everything together. It's also important to not go straight into super darks. Darks have variation in value too. Even this side of the bush is in shadow. It does start off a little bit lighter and then gets pretty dark in the darkest areas. So here I'm starting with a lighter value for my shadow. They are there, but if you squint at the photo, they're not really noticeable. So I just want to do it the perfect amount, I guess. perfect level of bush crackiness. What I learned from doing all the plants in this painting is to really maximize the amount of greens you're using. In my previous paintings, I try to make it a little too simple. This makes it a little more realistic and more interesting. See, I realized I overdid it on the shadows and that light part of the bush, so I'm lifting it up a bit. Just adding more subtle little marks. Here's where I'm talking about my paints like going bad. This color here is just super faded and it was like goopy and gluey as I was painting it. So I'm just going to lift that and make another color. And I really want to make sure I leave the white of that pillar because that's really going to stand out. I guess I could talk about what I listen to while I paint. I do listen to a lot of YouTube videos, but if I really want to focus, then I'll listen to some nice music. And for the past couple of years, what I've been painting to is the Microphones and Mount Erie. He's like the best artist ever. You know, the Glow Part 2 is really famous, but It Was Hot, We Stayed in the Water is also super good. And those albums get me in the mood to paint. They make me feel like I'm in the woods. I don't know. But the artist who has inspired me the most over the past decade is the late Six Dogs. Back in 2017, I thought I was Six Dogs. I wanted to be him so bad. I made SoundCloud videos, or SoundCloud songs. I still listen to him to this day. Some YouTubers I also like and who have inspired me are Dime Store Adventures. He makes videos about really obscure New England folklore. Like he'll scour hundreds of newspapers from the 1800s and 1900s and he'll find some weird story, or he'll try to like track down some rock in the woods that people mentioned in an article like 100 years ago. I just really like the way he talks and how he tells stories. And then another YouTuber is Gifted Hater. The original idea of this watercolor series was to be the gifted hater of watercolor, but I don't really know how I'd make that style in the context of watercolor instead of skateboarding, so I like gave up on that really quick. What Gifted Hater really does is he's like a skateboarding commentary channel, and you'll just hate on stuff, I guess, but in a goofy, fun way. Like he's not actually being negative, and then you'll just make like total bullshit videos where, you know, they're like gambling while playing skate. Just, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like, how could I make a watercolor video with my friends where we're integrating like drinking and shenanigans and music and competition? Just really not possible. Skateboarding is a lot easier to kind of integrate all that into. A long time ago, this YouTuber I used to watch made this like 3-hour long video where he just categorized all of his favorite things from every like subject ever. And it was like the most dorky thing ever. I thought it was super funny. So maybe I could do that. Like he was like, my favorite thing to collect is spoons. My favorite album is The Money Store. It was crazy. That was GBay99. He was like a League of Legends player back in the day. This is my favorite color. This is my favorite song. This is my favorite rapper. This is my favorite League of Legends champion. See, I really want this bush to stand out, so I'm going to redo it. I really want a really nice, stark, clean, dark. It was looking a bit too faded and wishy-washy. See, that is much better. Much better. Good job. That's going to blend in better when we add the really dark shadows on the ground there too. Because that whole area is getting shaded by that big tree on the left. Now I am going back over these areas because they are not dark enough. And I'm going to add a little bit of detail too. I'm being a bit more detailed with the shadow on the ground here because there is light shining through the trees, so I want to make sure to leave some speckled light areas. I'm just working light to dark. I'm going to put even more dark green on top of there to really emphasize the shadow. You know, now we're kind of in the finishing touches stage, so just going back and adding some detail. The only really big thing we have to do is paint that tree on the left side and then add some detail in those windows. I'm just making sure I don't forget to paint some of these little areas. I do that a lot in the past, where I'll take a painting off the board, put it away, and then see a photo of it and realize I missed a spot. So it's good to look at your painting for like 5 minutes after you're done, just to really make sure you got everything. Another good trick for these windows, like these window frames I'm painting now, is even though they're black, they're really not that dark. I use kind of a warm gray because the sun is still hitting some of those front-facing window frames. And then when they really get dark, like here, that'll kind of give it more pop. Get your head out the way! This video's just evolved into slop. Alright, you get the idea. I'm gonna cut this. The more detailed I start painting, the closer my head gets to the paper. And it's really hard not to do that. Even though I am like focusing, trying not to get my head in the frame. It did take me a long time to realize that I have to finish painting the door. I almost forgot to do that. Hold up, there's a train going by. The area I live in is like the equivalent of where Oliver Twist lives. I live amongst train yards and factories and industrial waste. The trains are nice to listen to though. You could hear their horns in the distance. I start painting the door and realize that my drawing has basically completely faded, so I'm going to draw it back in. Just super lightly. Now I'm doing some more painting of warm and cool grays with a hint of yellow ochre. It is good practice because a lot of buildings, if they're white, or if there's areas that are white, will have a lot of these colors and tones. John Singer Sargent actually has a lot of watercolor paintings that will utilize these warmer grays. These panes of glass here on the door are one of the darkest parts of the painting, and they're right in the focal point, so I want to make sure they're super dark. Here's another area that I almost forgot to paint. I just really want to get a muted, cool, purplish brown there, so it doesn't stick out too much, like right on top of the building. Alright, I darken it a little bit. But it is still more of a cool color compared to the warmer purple I use on the shadow on the building. I'm using my brain. And now for the grand finale, this large tree. And I'm really being loose with it. I don't want to care too much about doing this. It's on the side of the painting. We just want to get the values right and give it a little bit of crazy natural brush strokes. The branches and leaves do get darker as it goes down, so I'm going to replicate that. This brush, it just holds water weird. I need to practice with it. I feel like my leaves are a little too transparent. I'm afraid of screwing up the painting completely right at the last part. So I am trying to be a little careful with these dark areas, but I do have to have the courage to go dark where it needs to be. There's no being a baby now. Now for the very last thing, the shadows on this chimney on the left here. I just want it to kind of blend in and fade into the background and look a little bit more in place. I tried painting some of the shadows on that front-facing part of the chimney, but I don't think I could do that right, so I'm just not going to paint them at all. And I do draw my signature because I've messed up too many paintings where I paint my signature and I just mess that up. So I'm going to paint over my little drawing of my initials. Ta-da! Here is the finished painting. don't even know what to say. I just want to give a special thanks to Edward Hopper. I do actually like this painting. I think it's a bit more bold than my last one. And I think I'm starting to dial in more on my values, getting those a little better. So, thanks for watching the video.